It's time now for a new perspective with Mike Sherbino and Julie Stautland. The Silicon Valley Bank collapse is the biggest bank failure since 2008, and it has far-reaching consequences. We welcome to the show Chuck Bentley, who is a CEO, financial whiz, host of 2 syndicated radio shows, author, and film producer. Chuck also founded the Christian Economic Forum, a global network dedicated to advancing God-inspired solutions to the world's greatest economic challenges. Do we ever need that now? Chuck takes his relentless passion and travels the world teaching biblical financial principles to everyone of all walks of life. From Knoxville, Tennessee, welcome, Chuck Bentley.
Hey, we're glad you're with us today on The Perspective. And as you can see from the opening viz, we're talking about money. We're talking about people losing tons of money. And Julie, I remember a comedian saying this comment, okay? Said, if money talked, all it ever said to me was goodbye.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I know it was. I thought it was very good. And I didn't even tell you about it before we did it. And you laughed, so there you go. I'm feeling better already. Can you loan me some money?
Not a chance.
Not a chance. Okay, well, I want to talk about that attitude and why we're fearful not to loan people money, but someone far more qualified to do that is Chuck Bentley.
Yes.
And we want to welcome you, Chuck, to the program today. Thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Julie. Your joke reminded me of a comedian's joke that I heard.
Oh, yeah?
He said, I started out life with nothing and I still have most of it.
That's great. I like that.
Okay, so, but maybe you and I, if things get really depressed, maybe we should consider going on the road, and we could do a late comedy show somewhere. I don't know.
He's
maybe
always
there's hope
dreaming
for
of
all
that.
of us.
But anyway.
I think we better keep our day job, Mike.
Hey, so let me, I was having a bit of fun with Julie, but I said to her, hey, can you loan me some money? And she said, not a chance. Are people feeling that in the States where you are, that whole mindset, or is there still, everything's going to be okay? Talk to us about that.
Well, there's a lot of fear, Mike. The way I look at it is when you look at the price of gold, it serves as a fear index. When the markets are turbulent or when banks are in crises, people rush to gold or some sort of digital currency. Both of those assets have been increasing in value rapidly, which means there's a lot of fear in the market right now.
So what do you do when you dumb it down to us little guys, well, at least to me, and somebody does come along and say, can I borrow some money? And I had that happen recently. How should we process what is happening all around us? Is it a wise thing to do to keep bailing people out?
You know, Mike, we are in a banking crisis. There's no doubt about it. And it's a very serious one. And I think it's important for people to be paying attention. I'm often asked, who was at fault? You know, what did the bank do? Why weren't there more regulations? But in some ways, the bank was doing what most banks do. They were buying long-term bonds. And those long-term bonds issued by the U.S. government are considered some of the safest securities in the world. Yet, with the change in monetary policy, the increase in the money supply, with the increase in the interest rate, it devalued the assets of the bank. And that caused people to pull out their deposits, which is traditionally considered a bank run. And that causes panic, just like it did during the Great Depression. It's been happening in our banking system right now. So if you just sort of dumb it down, as you would say, Mike, which I don't think is necessary for you to understand this, that people were fearful they were going to lose all their money in the banks. So they started running from those banks and putting their money in other assets. And that destabilized our banking system. Our government is now saying, we've got it under control. Trust us. You know, it's all fixed. We're not sure that's true, but I don't think it's time to panic.
I want to ask you about this, the trust us, as you're talking about that, because I was thinking, you know, you have people becoming richer, like really, really rich. And then the other day I was reading in the newspaper that you have the U.S. saying, well, in some areas, we have to put a stop to the amount of food stamps we're giving out. We're capping it. And then you have all these people that have now been relying on these food stamps because they're already in a desperate situation. So How do we deal with that? I know that's the U.S., but obviously Canada has their own issues too. How do we deal with this disparity? It's like getting wider and wider.
Well, governments only have three choices for their sources of income. They either can borrow money, create debt, they can print money, or they can tax the people. And when you get to the max in all three of those categories, where your taxes are already fairly high, where the government debt is very high, and also the amount of printing and money supply is very high, it's a difficult problem to solve. I don't know if you grew up with those finger traps, those little woven puzzles where you put your finger in both ends and you try to get your finger out. That's where I think our government is right now. There are a lot of problems that you just described, Julie, that are not easy to solve. One economist said right now we're at a series of trade-offs. We don't have good choices for how to solve these problems. We're just going to have to choose which pain we're going to deal with.
I was thinking about
that's a good way of wording
something
it.
that you guys were talking about in the whole issue of trust. And years ago, I was doing some ministry in a jail, and I was there with a bunch of prisoners, and the one guy looked at me and said, "Listen, you got to trust me." and I'm thinking, okay, maybe. Here's the question, Chuck. In times like this, who can we trust? And I want us to talk about our relationship with God and how that impacts money. But right now, as a financial advisor, who would you say that people can trust?
Well, money always moves towards trust. There's a wonderful verse in Luke 16 that talks about if you're trusted with little, you'll be trusted with more. And just like water flows downhill, money moves towards trust. I think ultimately, Mike, to your question, we all have to trust the Lord. Economies are uncertain. They rise and they fall. Man's economy is built on sand, but in that parable, our economy, God's economy, is built on rock. We could trust him to provide no matter how difficult it gets. He said he will never leave us or forsake us. That's a promise that I've experienced. We've all experienced sometime in our life. So we operate prudently with finances. We make wise decisions. We do the right things, which we can talk about what those are in a time like this. But deep down, we don't put our hope in the government. We don't put our hope in a bank. We don't put our hope in gold. Our hope is in Jehovah Jireh.
Now, I want to jump in here. You have written a book about, evidence in the economy of God. So economic evidence of God. And I thought it was so interesting. I was reading in the beginning of it how you have this hero from China that was an atheist and how he was researching the economies of the world and how he found that economies where they were Christian-based, Judeo-Christian-based, they grew, and how that ended up impacting him so much. I would love, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I would love for you to tell in a nutshell that story and how that was so impacting to him and how you were able to meet him in Orlando.
Well, a Chinese economist, member of the Communist Party, was sent to the United States to study the basis for our success. And as an atheist communist, he concluded that it was Christianity. And historic evidence proves that Christianity creates the fastest growing economies, the strongest economies, the most sustainable economies, and the ones that help more people prosper than any other economic model in the history of mankind. And his conclusion is that those principles taught by Christ are the basis for every strong economy throughout history. And I agree with him that anytime you see human flourishing, it's because, whether acknowledged as Christian principles or not, those principles are actually being put into practice. So I became friends with Dr. Peter Shao. We met unexpectedly in Orlando, Florida. He was one of my heroes from afar. I'd never been to China, and there he was seated next to me. And he's a world-famous economist now. We've become dear friends. We travel together, and we teach people what God says about money so that they can experience freedom in their finances and the flourishing that's promised by God.
Well,
I
Chuck,
love
that's
that story. I love
well,
that.
there's a whole lot more to that story, and we're going to come back and hear what some of those values are that you were talking about. So stay with us. We're going to be back in a moment with Chuck Bentley.
For those of us who follow Jesus, we have a book. It isn't a theology book. It isn't a rule book. This book is a story. The story of God and humanity. A story Jesus said he was fulfilling. This book contains poems, riddles, letters, puzzling narratives, and new ideas. Yet, throughout it all, this book is full of the breath of God. For those of us who follow Jesus, this book is a treasure. This book is a tree of life. This book is a page turner. Turn the page with us.
You know, we're here with Chuck Bentley with Crown Financial Ministries. And Chuck, I know you're aware of this stat, but in the scriptures, there's about 500 verses that deal with faith, about the same amount that talk about the importance of prayer. But if I'm correct, there's well over 2,000 verses that reference how we're to handle our money. Do you think that God had it a little lopsided, or what is he saying to us, especially today?
Well, there's more verses about money and possessions in the scripture than there are about heaven and hell combined. Uh, I think the reason for that is that money has a godlike character. Many people derive their identity from money, they derive their security from money, their purpose from money, and it becomes a competitor for the control of our heart. It did in my life, Mike, and that's why 22 years ago, I told the Lord that I had been controlled by money and that I was sorry for that. And I never wanted money to control me again. And when I turned from that, I experienced a whole new life. I experienced freedom. I just finished a lesson on freedom from poverty, which so many people strive for. But in my life, I became free from riches. And that was the biggest change in my entire life. And God speaks about that so that only he is our master, not money.
So how, Chuck, do you now let God guide you in your working life?
You know, Julie, I do several things. I view my identity as a temporary steward. I'm not the owner of possessions. God has just entrusted them to me temporarily, and I will leave them to someone else. You know, there's no trailer that's going with us to take any of these possessions once we die. And so what do we do with them while we're on earth that would be pleasing to God? That's sort of the paradigm that every financial decision I make starts with. Not how to become more successful with money, but how to be faithful to God with whatever he's entrusted to me. And that's really set me free from the grip of materialism. And so many of the problems we have in society are driven by a false view of money. And I'm trying to help people understand what God says so that they can be free as well.
Yeah,
You know, it's
that's
very
great.
interesting you use that story. You can't take it with you. And my mind just flashed back to my own mother. She was very generous with my dad's money. And she would always be slipping the waitress or, you know, a granddaughter or grandson an extra $20 bill. And she'd just take it, dear, just take it. And if she wasn't slipping them a 20, she would slip them a chocolate bar. And I remember when we stood at her grave, as they lowered a casket into the ground, that one grandson dropped in a $20 bill, and the other one, someone else dropped in an O. Henry chocolate bar. And just the picture was so vital and just came alive as you both were chatting there. But I want to take it because it's true, we can't take it with us. But what about right now? Doesn't God want me to be financially well off? What do you think about that one?
No, I don't think there's any promise to prosper in the scripture. I think that's an errant theology to demand that God makes us rich. I also don't believe that he wants us to remain poor. I believe the extreme teaching on the prosperity gospel or the poverty gospel are wrong, that he really just wants us to be responsible with whatever he provides. And Mike, your story of your mother actually resonates with me and touches my heart. Because at my mother's funeral, I believe she was one of the richest people I've ever known, not by what she possessed, but by what she had given away. Even when she was dying in the hospital, she would send Amazon gift cards to the nurses and the people taking care of her. He would surprise them with a bicycle for their child. She was listening to a doctor who was tired and said, I want to buy a gift card so you can take your wife to dinner. And they loved her. She was one of their favorite patients up to the day she died. And I remember thinking, I want to be like my mom. I want to be generous and thinking about others with money and how I use it, as opposed to what I'm going to get in life or how I'm going to make it to the end of my life hoarding money. I want to go out giving money away.
Oh,
We really
I
need to
love that.
rewire our
I
thinking, don't
know,
we?
we
Because
do.
in this time of panic, we have an incredible opportunity to be incredibly generous.
Mm-hmm.
I'm convinced that's what God calls us to be. And it sounds like your mom and my mom were probably cut from the same cloth.
Yeah, I
So
think so, Mike.
I,
Go
I,
ahead,
I
Julie.
was just thinking, well, something else that came to me is like, now let's take a look at, you have the baby boomers and then you've got the Gen Z and you're dealing with economy. How is that the same or different for both of them to look at this, how to deal with this, especially if they want to deal with it in a righteous way?
Well, I think two things. Number one, when you get to be a baby boomer, you start thinking about the end. The end is in mind, your exit strategy. When you're young and just starting out, you're thinking about how to be successful and accumulate more. But I think the overarching theme in God's word and principles of his economy are think beyond this lifetime.
Mm,
His viewpoint is an eternal viewpoint. The goal in life isn't just to get through retirement comfortably.
right.
The goal is to be prepared to stand before the Lord and to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. And by the way, that's from Matthew 24, the parable of the talents, and it's about money.
Yeah.
We all want to hear, well done, but it's how we manage what God has provided for us that qualifies us for the Lord to say, you have given me joy. You spent your time on earth being outwardly focused, not inwardly focused. And Julie, I think that's the key to managing money.
Yeah. Good
Chuck, I
point.
want you to do two things for us, if you would, as we wrap up. We've got about 2 minutes left. Tell us a little bit about your book, why you wrote it, and why people need to get it. And then would you share a little bit of your own story about how you love money more than God at one point in your life? I know you referenced that. Maybe you could expand on that a little bit more. So
Well,
your
Mike,
go
yeah,
for it.
thank you. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that 2 minutes to explain my life story. I would just say I wrote the book. I wrote the book because I saw people on the streets of Taiwan sitting
Mm,
by these little hibachi grills burning money. And I remember thinking, are they burning money? Really? Is that happening? And these are bright, educated people, professional people, men in business suits, women who are career women. They would stop on the sidewalk and burn money. And I thought, what is happening? And I learned they have a practice of burning that money in hopes of sending it to their dead relatives. And so they believe that that burning of money is sending it to wherever that relative is. And in some cases, they say they're sending it to hell because their relative needs money. And I recognize that what we believe about God is reflected in how we manage money.
mm,
And when I tied that together, I wanted to write a book about it so that people could see their own lives and their own situation, like mine, that money was a reflection of what I really believed. We write our autobiography by the financial decisions we make. I can look at
mm.
your financial choices and know what you value in life. And I wanted the book to resonate with people because my autobiography would have been very ugly. It would have been extremely selfish. And when I repented of that idolatry, that love of money, it gave me an opportunity to reset. The Lord said it is better to give than to receive. And I didn't believe it. And I certainly wasn't practicing it, but I put it into practice. And it changed not only this temporal life where I am right now, but it prepared me for eternity. And I'm living for the true riches that God's promises are to those who are faithful to him. And that's how I'm trying to live my life, Mike. And I hope that's a good summary on time.
It definitely
You
is.
nailed it.
Thank you so much, Chuck. I really appreciate the fact of how you're showing us why we have money and how to use money and the importance of money. And it's a tool of God. And it's wonderful to have that explained more to all of us of all ages. So thank you so much for joining us today.
I appreciate
Oh,
it.
it's great, Julie. Thank you and Mike both. And let's keep our day job.
Okay, I'll take you up on that. All right.
All right, stay with us, everyone. We'll be right back.
You've probably noticed we have some guests here today. I'd like you to meet my new friends. Welcome.
They don't belong here. Half of them aren't even wearing shoes.
They're staining the new shag carpet.
They need our help. If you feel like you're misunderstood and judged, you will find forgiveness and freedom right here.
That was awesome.
Now that door is open any time of day. And if there are some who don't like that, well then that door works both ways.
All right, Pastor, let's begin.
I was almost done with this, but then you did what nobody else would even dare.
This thing that we found, I feel like I belong. You're gonna need a bigger church.
Our country is a dark and divided place, but now there's hope, and it's spreading.
This is your home, and I want you to tell all your friends about it.
I have to say, I really appreciated how Chuck shared about, what we do with our money really says a lot about our faith and our perspective, like burning it for our relatives. The economies are affected by our personal belief system, whether for the better or for the worse.
And one of the biggest challenges in times like this is that we can become very stingy. We can keep it all to ourselves. So I keep coming back to that question, Julie. Can you loan me $5,000?
Am I getting a raise?
Hey, we're glad you're watching The Perspective. Just ignore my sidekick here right now, but we're going to be right back, and we're going to talk about what happens when your dreams get shattered, how you hold on to them, from the life of Joseph.
Hi, my name is Roger Helland, Prayer Ambassador for the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada.
And I'm Brittany Leung, Volunteer Coordinator at Jubilee Church in Calgary.
All across our country, we are seeing a hunger for unity in and between churches and a deep desire to pray for revival.
We see that desire all across the Christian community, in pastors, in leaders, and of course, in individual Christians who want their churches to come alive in prayer.
That's why we are hosting Ignite, a worship and prayer summit for unity and spiritual awakening. This April, please join us in Ottawa, Calgary, Kelowna, or Regina for inspiration and training for pastors and church leaders. A half-day seminar will guide leaders on how to cultivate a culture of prayer in their churches, followed by prayer ministry and a catered complimentary dinner.
In the evening, we will hold a public prayer and worship event in each city to seek God's face in worship and prayer. Everyone is invited to the evening event. We will worship and pray together for unity and spiritual awakening across Canada. It's going to be amazing.
So friends, you are warmly welcomed to Ignite, a worship and prayer experience that we know Canada needs and desires at this exact moment. Ignite itself is actually a conference built from collaboration and a spirit of unity, co-hosted by the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association of Canada, the National House of Prayer, the Peace and Reconciliation Network, Vineyard Canada, and local leaders in each city.
And Roger, it's amazing that there's no cost for the seminar, the dinner, or of course the evening worship and prayer gathering. There are absolutely no barriers to your participation.
That's right. So please share this invitation widely. Invite everyone. Register today at theefc.ca/ignite, and let's cultivate united prayer to bless Canada in the name of Jesus.
Here at The Perspective, we believe in prayer, and I want to encourage you as a Canadian that if you're able to attend one of these events across the country, that you'll do that. I believe that it's ground shaping, and that it is the energy that propels the church to go forth and to be the difference that God has called us to be, and to take a stand even in the midst of difficult times. That's the story we're going to unpack today for the next few minutes as we continue in the life of Joseph. Joseph, you remember, was sold by his brothers into slavery. I mean, how do you deal with that? And then he is sent to Egypt. And we're going to discover today that he gets charged for a crime that he never did. And that was the master who he was to work for. His wife took an interest in him and wanted Joseph to sleep with her. And he wouldn't do it. He said, how can I do this thing and sin against God? And as a result, she screamed rape, and he was thrown back into prison. Many times what happens is that when our dreams come to the brick wall, when they come to the Red Sea experience, we can be overwhelmed. Joseph had a dream that God was going to give him a place of preeminence. He had that when he was about the age of 17. His brothers did everything in their power to see to it that it would never happen. They got angry with him. They could not imagine that he would be over them, especially as the younger brother. And so those 11 brothers had a pact against him. And they sent him away as a captive, and presuming that his life would come to an abrupt end. But God had a plan. And when God puts a dream in your heart, I want to encourage you to hold on to it. I want to encourage you not to let go of it. You're likely going to hit hard times. And dreams only grow as we risk to step out in the struggle with God. But here, listen to what I want to share with you right now from a man named Dan Allender. It says, hopes and dreams grow as risk invites us to struggle with God. But hope grows only if we accept the invitation. When you hit the brick wall, you got to accept the invitation, which is God saying, will you trust me? Will you trust me with your dream? Will you allow me to do what only I am able to do? And many people refuse to struggle and just write God off. But what determines a person's response to risk? Oddly, if we're satisfied, one is unlikely to risk. But when we are dissatisfied with the situation, we're willing to step out. In a previous show, we saw how Pastor Pavlo went back to Ukraine with his family. He was prepared to risk because God has given him a dream of helping his native people in Ukraine to rebuild and to repopulate their city. What is a dream God's put in your heart? Maybe it's to work with teens, maybe work with youth, maybe to be part of a volunteer organization, to be part of something greater than yourself. But many times what happens is that we get hit with bitter experiences, and that holds us captive. That could have held Joseph captive in prison, but he chose not to let it happen. And then even the prison of false accusations, when Potiphar's wife accused him of a crime that he didn't do, who was there to protect him, to defend him? We'd quickly say no one was there, but God was there. And what we find out is the scripture that says where Joseph knew that God was with him. He was with him even in that situation. And the Lord is with you today, even if you feel your dreams have been crushed. It's not too late. Surrender them to God and say, God, will you live through me? Will you love through me? And will you reveal your glory to other people so that they will know that you are King of Kings and Lord of Lords?